to run through a game of Halo Fleet Battles and just doing a bit of a pre-game introduction to different stats. This is UNSC forces, some of the ones that you get in the Halo Fleet Battles products box by Spartan Games. As you can see, the bases control multiple ships. Each base is called an element, whether it's a single ship, such as the case over here, or multiple ships, such as there. Different ships have different stats, obviously, otherwise the game will get quite repetitive quite fast. Now, at the top you'll notice that there's small written down. Hopefully, if it focuses in, there we are, small, and 10. The 10 is how far it can move. Small is important for what class ship it is and when abouts it can do turning, because turning happens at various phases. The 4, 3, 3 are the damage tracks. You move from left to right, progressively getting smaller as the ship takes more damage. When it loses its final damage track, the ship dies. Hangars are how many wings it can fly out, so squadrons of wings, so little small ships that are represented by tokens at the moment. For this demo game, we'll be skipping the wings and order phases because they're a little too complicated to get in one go. Down the bottom we have written what class of ship it is and what formation it's in, if one at all. So, of course, this is the Paris frigate. They're in trident formation as compared to the arrowhead formation that you see over here, with different attack and defense values. So, this is a slightly more defensive formation, as you can tell by the 4, as compared to the 3 for the initial damage tracks. We'll cover damage and things like that once we get to the game. This is a marathon heavy cruiser. It's a lot more robust. It's a medium class ship, so that means it moves in a different way. It has hangars, which means that it can actually do flights of wings, but again, not doing that this particular game. Marathon cruisers, so the bigger ships can either come usually in a supported form or an unsupported form. So this is its default form right here, just a marathon heavy cruiser, whereas over here we have the supported one, which is represented by a Paris frigate on the side of the base. If we look over at the stat cards, different weapons have different properties, and there's a lot of info here, so I figured we could go through some of them just before the games, give you a little bit of familiarization so you're not too daunted when I start throwing all these terms at you. So this is for a UNSC supported marathon heavy cruiser, so its movement is 8 inches. When you're moving, you have to move at least half your minimum, you have to minimally move at least half your movements to represent the fact you are in space, you've got inertia, it's keeping on going. The damage track is what you need to exceed, to cause damage on the actual ship. So it's sort of like your defense, and anything below that point does no damage. So you can do lots of little itty-bitty damage to it, but if it doesn't exceed that damage track, the ship's not actually hindered in any way. The build rating, which is next on the list, is basically how much that ship takes in terms of battle groups. Elements are formed into battle groups. Each of them has a build rating, and your build rating cannot exceed 6. So on here we have a build rating of 1 for the Paris frigates. In either formation, only cost 1. A supported marathon cruiser is 3, Paris frigate again. An unsupported marathon cruiser is 2. Your groups cannot exceed a combined BR, build rating, of 6. So over here we have some Covenant ships with a build rating of 4 for a CCS supported cruiser, battle cruiser that is, and 1 for the 2 corvettes. So that's actually a maximum strength battle formation, or battle group. Over here we have a smaller one with 3 and 1. Additionally, all battle groups have to contain 1 capital element, indicated by the term capital in the bottom right, and 1 non-capital, indicated by the lack of the term capital, to be a legal battle group. Some of these might be a bit small. There's a great deal of advantages to having bigger battle groups. However, because this is a small intro game, I've tried to avoid that. It's actually quite to the detriment of the UNSC. This game is going to be carried out on a table that's 35 inches long, so the Covenant, having advantage at long range, is actually... at short range, my apologies. The UNSC having the advantage at long. The Covenant has the upper hand here. To make up for that, the UNSC outpoints the Covenant by 15. So 400 points for the Covenant exactly, and 415 for the UNSC. Alright, getting back to these stat cards. There are hangars, which are ignored, I've said before. Boarding craft, also ignored. Security detail, which forms your defense against boarding craft, also ignored. Primary weapon, heavy Mac. Okay, so the primary weapon is a heavy Mac. Weapons must fire, so you ignore prefixes such as heavy or light, so you'll notice that there's heavy for the marathon cruiser, but on an Epoch class cruiser it's a light Mac. They would fire in the same firing solution. Firing solution is a combination of weapons firing at one element. You nominate it and it forms a certain power. The first number listed in the range is your short range. So anything from 0 up to 10 is short range. Anything from 0 up to 16 is short range. Whereas the 20 is the max range, and so you cannot exceed that second value. Same is the case over here. Alright, weapon loadouts, Mach 1. Because this is a light Mach, it has a value of 1. The more Machs fired at a target in one firing solution, the more powerful it is. A marathon heavy cruiser, however, has a heavy Mach, which fires with 2. There's also super Machs, which fire with 3, and they cause advantages that are applied before any roll of damage is made. So they're actually very, very, very powerful. Arc is what arc the weapons can fire in. So F is for fore, P is for port, S is for starboard, and A is for aft. Okay. For the dice, that's how many dice you roll. All weapons in Halo Fleet battles roll on the same damage chart, with the strength of the weapon being indicated by the amount of dice available. So 12 here and 15, indicating that the missile batteries are incredibly powerful and actually more powerful than the light Macs. Whereas over here, the heavy Macs actually outdo the missile batteries. You can see that smaller ships can't really bring as much to bear and have much smaller dice pools caused as a result of their weapons. What else have we got? Okay, now for F, for all missile batteries, it's got some special rules. The UNSC can fire to the front, so that's the fore arc, but only at the closest target. Alternatively, they can fire at P plus S, that's port plus starboard. And that would mean they would get the dice pool of 15 for each side. So you can fire left and right for 15, so for a total of 30. But once you nominate to fire at a battle group, so battle groups fire at a battle group, and then elements fire at individual elements within a battle group. So over here, if the UNSC was firing, long range, some of the weapons will obviously be out. Because this is an example, if the UNSC was firing at this battle group, they would have to nominate this battle group as the firing target, and then they would have to say to them that they're going to target this element, this element, this element, or however they want to break up their weapons. The more weapons fired at one thing, the more powerful, and for the UNSC in particular, because the Covenant have incredibly robust ships, they should really fire at probably one target. Let's say that we had several UNSC battle groups and they wanted to take out stuff, and we had this is a different battle group right here. It's not a legal one. Let's say the Corvette's been destroyed or something like that. If they were firing this battle group over here, it doesn't matter that this one's right next to them, or hell, in the middle of them, they cannot fire at that ship because it's not part of the same battle group. Okay, so that's just a little bit of game mechanics. As you can see, the arcs are broken up quite clearly. So the fore arc is broken up into a 90-degree chunk taken, and it's very useful to have those markings on the base because of turning, which we can cover very shortly. So you've got your fore, your port, your starboard, and your aft arcs. Firing into the aft arc of a ship is fantastic. It's incredibly likely to cause critical damage and apply vulnerable markers, which are truly horrifying things to experience. We can cover that more later. Alright, so that's the movement as well. Alright, sorry, I was going to do this in the game, but I'll do it twice, so apologies if you watch both videos. But this is how movement works. Small ships, as is delineated by the small marker, can move. There's a primary turn, so there's a primary turning phase. So you nominate a battle group to move, and every element within the battle group moves, again, to the minimum of half their distance. So if they can move more than that. In this case, it's small and 10 inches, and medium and 8 inches. So to move this battle group comes the first turning phase. In the first turning phase, small and medium ships are allowed to turn up to 45 degrees. So they can move up to 45 degrees in any direction. And they can move as far as they want, but they have to maintain unit coherency of 6 inches. So there can be no more than 6 inches. Measurements are made from the center of the base, so from the absolute center here. So where the ships are on the base is actually irrelevant. As you can see, when there's only one ship, it's always placed at the center, but it's really just for aesthetics and to break it up, and I think they actually achieve the aesthetics quite wonderfully. So we've got the ship, all measurements made from the center. Small ships get to move in the first and second turning phases. So the first turning phase is small and medium ships, and then comes movement, and then comes the second turning phase. Now, for a small ship, because they can do both, they're actually incredibly good at sneaking around. So they could move that, so the 45 degrees, up to 10 inches, so for instance there, and then another 45, so they could face forwards, or they could do 45 and turn this way. So they can very quickly change course and bearing, and that's a very versatile thing to have. But again, because it's in a battle group with this, it needs to maintain within 6 inches of that. Battle group coherency is not explicitly needed at all times. Like, you could theoretically move out of it. Well, not even theoretically, actually you can explicitly move out of it. But at massive disadvantage to your ships. So ships that are outside the main segment, so the smaller of the two, decided by the build rating of the ships, whichever group is biggest, will suffer. The biggest group is fine, the smallest group suffers massive disadvantage. So for this one, because it's a medium ships can only turn once, but they have the decision to move either to turn in either the first or second move phase. So if you wanted to avoid something, so say this ship was over here, and obviously that's very, very dire circumstance for the UNSC, running into terrain is a very sure way to get your ships destroyed. It's not always going to happen, but it's likely to cause considerable damage, and most of the defense systems aren't used to combating that kind of system. So they could turn 45 degrees like so, and then move. But they'd be stuck at that movement and they couldn't change directions again. Alternatively, they could move forwards, their full move, wah, and then do their 45 degree. So that's how that works. Now for the Covenant ships, we have small and medium. I know their ships are considerably bigger if you look at the size difference between a marathon cruiser and a CCS, but they're both classed as medium ships. The Covenant ships are just so much bigger. Alright, coming back to the unit cards, making sure we've got this. We've covered that. Now we haven't covered system loadouts. System loadouts are basically the special abilities of the ships. So carrier action, we're ignoring carriers for this game, so we'll cover that. That's basically how many ships that it can bring back from the scrapyard, which is your graveyard, or off the board, to launch a new wave of fleets every turn. Hard burn. If your ship elects not to turn at all, UNSC ships can do a hard burn where they move forwards that additional distance. So 1 inch for a Epoch class, 2 inches for a Marathon, and a full 3 inches for a Paris class. Not that you really want to hard burn all that often, because it's usually quite bad for the UNSC to get too close. But if you're trying to escape off a board edge, or really needed to be somewhere, or wanted to get an extra range, all options to consider. Alright, Missile Barrage. Missile Barrage is that special rule that I was telling you about here with the asterisk, where they can fire their missiles to the fore, but only legally at the closest target. Otherwise they can fire to port or starboard. Missile Barrage will come up a lot because your MACs, your primary weapons, the real damage dealers of the UNSC fleet, can only fire to the fore arc, which is why they're so powerful. Alright. Point defense systems are defense against bombing runs done by bombers, as well as defense against boarding craft attempting to get on, and very frequently also defense against missiles or plasma torpedoes being fired against you. Titanium armor is a UNSC defensive role, so it works in the same manner that weapons do, so they fire at a firepower rating 4, which we'll cover in the game because we're going to cover those details anyway, but it's a defensive roll, and that indicates how many dice you get to roll against anything that's been fired at you. So a plasma lance, you would get to roll 5 dice in defense and count up how many successes you have. And you've got point defense. So against missiles, you would get the combined value of those two, because you'd have 6 and 5 for 11. Titanium armor, however, is depleted after your first failure. So titanium armor represents the strength of the hull of the UNSC ships. So obviously a frigate-class cruiser is going to have a much smaller defense. So it's only got a titanium armor rating of 2. After you lose your first damage track over here, you lose your titanium armor, and that roll is never again applied. So quite devastating. The different colours on the base indicate in what arcs certain weapons can fire. So the exterior arc, the bigger one, bigger is your primary arc. So in this case, it's only highlighted in the front, which indicates that the max, which is the primary weapon, can only fire in the fore arc. The white indicates the secondary weapons, which can only fire in the port and starboard arcs. And the missiles, as we covered before, have a dark blue because it indicates a special firing pattern where it can only fire to the front under certain conditions where it's at the closest target. All UNSC ships have those, at least all the ones we've got here. Those same rules. The Covenant have much bigger arc with their basic corvettes, with their port, starboard and fore arc being able to fire for their primary weapon, but a much more limited secondary arc, at least on their corvettes, only being able to fire plasma torpedoes to the fore. If you look at the CCS battlecruiser, it can fire both weapons in all 3 arcs, so everything but the aft. Okay. I think that's probably enough. No, final thing we'll run through for this video is the Covenant special abilities. Again, we're going to cover this in the main game. You'll actually see it in effect. It's a lot more a lot easier to grasp. I can do English, I promise. If you see it in action. So, a cloaking system indicates that this ship gets a defensive bonus if the weapons firing at it are in their long range value. So a cloaking system would be -1 to their firepower rating, which I suppose we could cover now. So here's firepower rating. Everything fires at a default firepower rating of 4. So that's all weapons. So MAC, everything, even defensive rolls do this, and you count up the total number of successes. So for each 2 that you roll counts as 2 successes. There is a 1 in 6 chance of getting 2. Each 1 you roll counts as 1. Pretty obvious so far. You can reroll 1 miss for each 2 that you get. So that's their exploding roll mechanic. It's heavily limited because you can only do it for as many misses that you have. It's not infinite like I've been told happens in other games, and it was a big turn off for people. Certain weapons get advantages to firing at certain ranges or are just inherently more powerful than others and may start at a default firepower rating of 5, which is a devastating roll. So that's a really good one. So it's the same rules as your normal exploding roll, but you can reroll failures as well as misses. For a crushing roll, which happens a lot more than you might think, it's actually worse than your default exploding roll. No rerolls are permitted, but 2 still count for 2s, 1 still count for 1s. A weakened roll, every 2 that you roll counts as 1, 1s count as 1, no rerolls are permitted, and for an impossible roll means it's just too unlikely to happen, it's not going to do anything. So a cloaking system means that when you're firing at long range, you get -1 to your roll. So an exploding roll would be taken down to a crushing roll. Defensive array is their version, the Covenant version, of titanium armor. However, even after the Covenant have taken damage, because their ships are just much better designed, much more scientifically advanced, based on the Forerunner tech, they get that for each of their damage tracks, regardless. Glide is a special movement where instead of moving forwards, like every other ship has to, Covenant ships can move laterally to the value of their glide, which is usually about half of their actual movement rounded down. So rounded up. So 3 inches as compared to the 5-inch actual movement. Huge damage track, by the way, if you look at that 11, 10 and 5. Like those things are beasts. Alright, and point defense, of course, is point defense. It's the same. Now, corvettes and Parrots frigates, I didn't actually cover that earlier, they both have elusive, which means that it's -1 to shoot at them, because they're much smaller targets than the other ships. There are exceptions to that, but that's more of a nuanced rule, and we can sort of forget about that. And it won't come up in this case because you need to have a battle group that's comprised entirely of ships with the elusive special rule loadout. I think that concludes everything for this video, and I'll see you shortly for the main game. Catch ya.